the progressive events that led up to this Albany movement was situations like this. We had Booker T. Washington. How many people know anything about this man? He was the greatest black man at that time. If you can imagine a combination of Bill Cosby, Colin Powell, and Denzel, he was the man. He was the man, okay? He was the first black man to actually be invited for dinner at the White House, to sit down with Theodore Roosevelt. That was, to some people, a crime. People in the South were just pulling their hair out. How could you invite a black man to the White House? But my God, this man's influence is still going strong. He instituted and established one of the first black universities, Tuskegee University in Tuskegee. What did Tuskegee do? Tuskegee started educating black people to do what? To work in the field of agriculture. And some science involved there. But the thing about it, he was a smart cookie. If he would have had an institution that was training lawyers, this would have been burned down. Engineers, burned down. Anything that was threatening that echelon would have been burned down. He told them, hey guys, I'm going to train black people just to work with their hands. We're going to stay out of your way. We're going to till our fields. We're not going to compete with you. And they loved it. And he went up north and he raised goo goggles of money. And that's why he was so successful. Now, another case in point. My grandfather, who came to this college, I think in the early 1900s, he was this man's carriage driver. He drove him around. And imagine the man with this influence, and his whole thing was to be self-reliant. That's what he taught every single student. You should not rely on society out here. You rely on your own resources. You use your hands, you start your farms, you do whatever you have to do. Become a mechanic, do what you have to do to survive. So this man's influence, I cannot tell you how great he was. A lot of blacks hated his guts. They thought he was an Uncle Tom. You know what an Uncle Tom is, guys? Young people, I want a young person to tell me what an Uncle Tom is. Uncle Tom.
Isn't it someone who promotes the white ideas, like agrees with them and goes along with it?
Very good. Uncle Tom is somebody who kind of like, he's going to cozy up and he's going to appease the white race. He's not going to do what he should do. So you had a lot of what we call very radical African Americans who said, this man is full of crap. Why can't he train lawyers and doctors and blah, blah, blah? But you know what? What he did was great. For what he did, it was fantastic. Moving on. Now, other progressive events. Who is this man? Rockefeller. People hate wealth. They hate his face, but let me tell you something. He pumped a lot of money into the black community, and especially into a lot of colleges. Almost every college, every black college out there got money from him. And I tell you what, Booker T. Washington met with him hundreds of times to get money and to keep things going. And he was the greatest supporter of Spelman College. Spelman College is a premier African-American female college in Atlanta. And I'm telling you right now, if you rank all the black colleges today, Spelman is on the very top. And it's because of this man. He had class. Look at that. He knew that what he was doing was going to have a legacy. And so he began to promote funding and helping blacks come into an age where they could help themselves. Okay, now I'm going to give you 5 tipping points. I'm moving into the time when the Albany movement started. Because the Albany movement would have never started without these events. It was not a self-isolated situation, and the people in the Albany movement weren't that special. They were like me and you. They were just like me and you. One of the tipping points was the establishment of the NAACP, known as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. What did they do that was different than any other black organization? Okay, people, can anybody tell me that? Students? I want to see how good you are with your history. Anybody know about the NAACP? What made them different? The NAACP, this was the first organization of very educated African Americans and whites who said enough is enough. We're going to fight in the court system. We're going to use litigation, we're going to use lobbying, and we're going to use education to fight all of this racial discrimination. And they were fierce. They went in and they filed hundreds of court cases that you will never hear of. But the biggest one, which is another tipping point, was the Brown versus Board of Education. This was a major, major victory for civil rights. It now said that the separation of white and black institutions in terms of education was illegal and unconstitutional. So when my parents heard that, they probably just went nuts. I think every black parent heard that, and many white parents too. When they heard that this was going to be enforced, they were very happy, okay? Another tipping point was Mahatma Gandhi. Strange tipping point, but this is my tipping point. I feel that this man's influence in the world was incredible because what he did in India was that he was able to use nonviolence techniques to push out the British. And believe me, every African-American activist looked up to him for what he did. The next person, or the next event was Rosa Parks in the Montgomery bus boycott. The Montgomery bus boycott happened around 1955. What made this so different was that they used the techniques of Gandhi to basically bring that city to its knees. What did they do?
They quit writing
They
about
boycotted for 382 days. That had never been done before. They actually went against a system that had all the power and money, and they brought it to its knees. They basically made that bus company go bankrupt. And they won the rights, and that is when people in my city said, oh my God, if they can do that only 100 miles away, there's a chance that we can do that as well. So that's when that kind of thing started happening in their heads, that there was a possibility. Now the last tipping point I think was King and the influence that he had. King, by what he did with the nonviolence techniques and his civil disobedience techniques, really inspired many, many people. The interesting thing about this, when you read about the Montgomery bus boycott, they had contributions coming from China. People from China were behind this movement. So everybody in the world was watching, and this was center stage for the movement. Quickly, let's see. I want to bring up some movements that were also important. There was a movement for young activists, people that were between the ages of like 18 and 24. It was called SNCC. It was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They were kind of associated with Dr. King's movement, the SELC. The National Urban League was about trying to help African Americans in terms of doing business. SELC was King's organization out of Atlanta. Theirs was more aimed at trying to get rid of racism through education. And then the NAACP, I just talked about that. And then CORE, they were the ones who actually went and did the sit-ins. They did sit-ins in various places. Young kids got together. They went through these different workshops, and they were trained not to fight back. And this was very, very effective.
Was that the ones in the lunchrooms?
That's right. The ones in the lunchrooms, right. Okay, now here we are in 1960-61. Something very, very strange happened. These two guys, Cordell Reagan, Charles Sherrod, they are kind of like the unsung heroes of this movement, but they are amazing in terms of what they did. He was a Baptist minister trained in theology, and he was a great singer. He was studying to be an opera singer. These two guys were with that group called SNCC, the young organization of activists. They decided they wanted to come to Albany and help out. They just came out of nowhere. No one knew they were coming. And they were the ones that none of the respectable blacks wanted to deal with. They were just like dressed kind of, you know, grungy, overalls. This is the way they came to town. And nobody wanted to deal with them. They wanted to kick them out, as a matter of fact. They thought they were communists. What they started doing was they started going around to different places where youth were. They started playing basketball with them, talking to them about their rights and what they should do. And then they started inviting these youth to the church and started going through biblical verses about their right to have freedom. And so many of the youth began to catch on and say, yeah, you're right, we should pick it. So one of the things that just happened was there was a order from the Supreme Court. It was called the ICC, desegregation law concerning bus lines. And so what they said was, in any place where you have like a Trailways bus station, you cannot have separated or segregated waiting rooms. So they wanted to test this in Albany. I did the wrong thing again, okay? And so pretty soon after that, the movement started. This was the so-called Albany movement that was formed to combat racism and segregation in the city. This is my father. He was eventually the president after the first round. Now, the interesting thing about those two troublemakers that came to town, those two troublemakers were actually about to be kicked out of town. And my grandfather, C.W. King, he was more or less the patriarch of the family. He said, I'm going to let them stay with me. He had lots of apartment buildings and stuff in the city, and so those two stayed with him, and they were able to do their business, okay? Okay, it's a family affair. This is my father. This is little Jonathan here. Not really wanting to be there. I'm telling you, not really wanting to be there because my daddy was always going into really all kinds of hot spots.
What did your dad do for a living?
My daddy was a real estate agent, and also he was into insurance. So going back to his father, C.W. King, like I said before, C.W. King went to Tuskegee. He was the carriage driver for Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington told him, go back to Albany, and he said, become self-reliant, buy lots of property, and save your money. So my grandfather had this thing in his head. I was talking to my great aunt the other day. She said what he did was he always saved 50% of everything he earned. 50% of everything, and he was systematic about it. And I said, well, how did he eat? He said, well, he didn't really eat. He ate lots of peanuts. He had this thing about taking peanuts to work. He'd eat peanuts all day, and he just saved his money. And so he was able to educate 7 boys. They all went to college. One went to Oxford. One ended up as a professor down in Australia and also in London. Another one went to Spain, brought a wife from Spain. He ended up speaking 6, 7 languages. He was an amazing guy. But he was very eccentric because my grandfather actually brought the NAACP branch, the first branch, to Albany. So he was a rabble-rouser too. And when he saw those 2 eccentric rabble-rousers, he said, I'm going to support those guys. So that's kind of like, you know, where things were going. And this is something that I can identify with. We did this all the time. My daddy was a rabble-rouser too. I remember, you know, I think right here they're trying to register to vote. And you can see the ladies very annoyed, like, what are they doing bringing this kid in here? You know? And this was our maid. This was Ella Maid. So it was a family affair. Everybody was involved in this. The other persons in here is, this is C.B. King. This is my uncle. Now C.B. King was sent to Case Western to study law. And when he came back to Albany, he was the only lawyer in southern Georgia. And he represented all the African Americans, from maids to drunkards. It was him who took them and represented them in court. So he had a very big part to play in this. He was also the advisor to Martin Luther King, you know, on many occasions. And this is my mother. Let's see, she's in this position right here. This is basically on the streets of Albany when this particular movement was going on. But I can remember situations, for example, having to go to the boys' club to integrate their pool. I was only 6 years old. He brought along my older brother, who loved to be mischievous. He wanted to go. Okay? So we go up there and wait in this long line, and the people are looking at us like we are crazy. And I'm saying, what am I doing here? Why do I have to be here? But long story short, they sent a paddy wagon, and they sent a police car. Okay? We're just trying to integrate the pool, right? And they put me and my brother in the paddy wagon, and they put my father in the police car, and they sent us to the police station. I will never forget that as long as I live. Because we were in there with 2 really bad cops, and they were cursing us all the way there, and they were saying, we should throw you in the Flint River. You bad boys, blah, 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 blah. So that's the kind of atmosphere. So when my daddy was taking me around, I was saying, why do you want to take me to these places? I don't want to go out there, you know, downtown where all of these big-looking German shepherds are breathing on us, and you got people with these, you know, big guns. That is the kind of atmosphere that we were dealing with.